The sun blazed through the tall windows of Naval Base San Diego's main auditorium, casting geometric shadows across rows of dress uniforms. Staff Sergeant Maria Reyes stood in formation with 11 other recipients, her Marine Corps dress blues pressed to razor-sharp perfection, her cover positioned exactly 1 inch above her eyebrows. Everything about her appearance screamed military precision, but inside she was drowning. The Medal of Valor felt impossibly heavy in the small velvet box the ceremony coordinator had shown her earlier. "You'll feel it when the Admiral pins it on," the coordinator had said with an encouraging smile. "It's the weight of honor." Maria almost laughed. She already knew about weight. She'd been carrying it for 12 years. The auditorium was packed. At least 400 people, Navy brass, Marine Corps officers, enlisted personnel from every branch, and families of the honored. Camera flashes popped like fireflies. A military band played something patriotic that Maria's brain registered but couldn't name. Her mother sat in the third row, dabbing tears with a handkerchief that had belonged to Maria's father before he passed. Next to her, Maria's aunt held up a phone, recording everything. They were so proud. That made it worse somehow. Admiral Christopher Wade stepped to the podium, his voice amplified through speakers that made every word echo. "Today, we recognize extraordinary valor in combat operations. These men and women represent the finest our military has to offer." Maria's jaw clenched. She stared at a spot on the wall above the Admiral's head, an old sniper trick to stay focused. Don't think, don't feel, just be present. One by one, recipients were called forward. An Army Ranger who pulled 3 soldiers from a burning vehicle, a Navy corpsman who ran through enemy fire to reach wounded Marines. Each story was heroic, tragic, beautiful. Each person walked to the stage with varying degrees of comfort. Some smiled, some fought tears. One young soldier looked like he might pass out. Staff Sergeant Maria Reyes, United States Marine Corps. Her name crackled through the speakers, applause erupted. Maria's legs moved automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 formations. Left foot, right foot, spine straight, eyes forward. The walk to the stage felt like miles. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She felt exposed, like she was in a sniper scope instead of behind one. The Admiral's aide read her citation. For extraordinary heroism during combat operations in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Reyes maintained overwatch position for 6 hours under heavy enemy fire, neutralizing multiple threats and directly saving the lives of 27 United States Marines during a medical evacuation. Her courage under fire and tactical excellence exemplify the highest traditions of military service. The words felt like they were describing someone else, some superhero who didn't exist. Maria remembered that day differently. She remembered being terrified. She remembered her spotter, Corporal Jimmy Rodriguez, bleeding next to her, begging her to stop shooting and get them both out of there. She remembered the sun cooking them on that rooftop. She remembered running out of water. She remembered thinking she'd die there. But mostly, she remembered the faces. Through her scope, she'd watched young Marines drag wounded buddies toward the landing zone. She'd seen a Navy corpsman working frantically on a kid who couldn't have been older than 19. She'd seen the medevac helicopter, blades spinning, ready to lift off if the Taliban got too close. 27 souls hanging in the balance. Admiral Wade pinned the medal to her chest. The medal was cold against her uniform. He shook her hand firmly, holding it longer than protocol required, looking into her eyes with something that might have been understanding. He'd seen combat too. Maybe he knew. "Thank you for your service, Staff Sergeant," he said quietly just for her. "You brought them home." Maria saluted. The Admiral returned it crisply. Cameras flashed in a strobe-like frenzy. She executed an about-face and returned to formation, her mind screaming at her body to hold it together just a little longer. The medal caught the sunlight and threw a small reflection across the wall. It looked like a targeting laser. The ceremony continued, but Maria stopped processing it. She stood at attention, eyes forward, but her mind was 8,000 miles away on a rooftop in Sangin. She could still smell the cordite. still feel the rifle's recoil, still hear her spotter's labored breathing, still see the faces of the Taliban fighters in her scope, young men, some of them, probably somebody's brother or son. She'd made split-second decisions that ended their stories and extended others. People called her a hero. The Marine Corps called her one of the finest scout snipers of her generation. Her instructors said she had ice water in her veins, but Maria knew the truth. Every trigger pull had taken something from her. Every confirmed threat down meant she'd ended a human life. Yes, they were enemies. Yes, they would have killed Americans. Yes, it was justified, but justified didn't mean easy. Necessary didn't mean painless. When the ceremony finally ended, the auditorium exploded into motion. Families rushed forward. Officers networked. Media representatives approached recipients for interviews. Maria was immediately surrounded. A Marine Corps photographer wanted formal shots. A reporter from Navy Times had questions. Her mother pushed through the crowd, arms open for an embrace. "Mija," her mother cried, pulling her close. "We're so proud. Danny would be so proud." Maria hugged her mother, feeling the older woman's body shake with sobs. Danny, her brother. The reason she'd become a sniper in the first place. The ghost that haunted every mission. If he'd had someone like her watching over him that day in 2009, maybe he'd be here now. Maybe he'd be the one wearing this medal. "I need some air, Mom," Maria whispered. "I'll find you at the reception." She extracted herself gently and headed for the side door. She needed to breathe, needed to think, needed to remember why she'd done this job for 12 years. The medal felt heavier with every step. She had no idea that in 90 minutes, one question would change how she thought about everything. The reception hall gleamed with polished brass and military precision. Long tables draped in navy blue and Marine Corps scarlet lined the walls, laden with finger foods that nobody seemed to be eating. Officers clustered in groups, their conversations a low rumble punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. The bar at the far end was doing brisk business. Maria stood near a window, nursing a glass of water, watching the sun begin its descent over the Pacific. She'd changed nothing about her appearance since the ceremony, but somehow she felt more exposed now. At least during the formal proceedings there was structure, protocol, a script to follow. Here, in the social chaos of the reception, she was just another person in a room full of people who wanted to talk about things she wanted to forget. A young Navy lieutenant had cornered her 10 minutes earlier, gushing about how cool it must be to be a sniper. Maria had politely excused herself before saying something she'd regret. Cool wasn't the word. Necessary, maybe. Brutal, definitely, but never cool. She checked her watch. Another 40 minutes and she could reasonably leave without offending anyone. Her mother had already departed. The excitement and emotion had exhausted her. Maria's aunt stayed long enough to take 100 photos, then left to pick up Maria's younger cousin from soccer practice. Now Maria was alone in a room full of people, which was exactly how she preferred it. "Staff Sergeant Reyes." The voice boomed across the reception hall like artillery fire. Conversation stuttered. Heads turned. Maria's shoulders tensed automatically. She knew that voice. Every Marine knew that voice. Lieutenant General Robert Hammond. He was a legend, 3 decades of service, 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and a reputation as one of the Corps' finest combat leaders. He'd commanded forces in Desert Storm, led operations in Fallujah, and mentored a generation of Marine officers. He was also known for his old-school approach, his salty language, and his belief that Marines should be tough, rough, and ready to joke about anything. Maria turned to see him approaching with an entourage. 5 officers trailed behind him, 2 Marine colonels, a Navy captain, a commander, and a lieutenant colonel she recognized from the ceremony. Hammond stood 6'3", barrel-chested, with steel-gray hair cut high and tight. His dress uniform couldn't contain his personality. He walked like he owned the building. Maybe he did. "General," Maria said, coming to attention. "At ease, Marine. This is a party, for God's sake." He reached her in 3 long strides and grabbed her hand in a grip that could crack walnuts. His eyes were sharp blue, the kind that had seen too much combat to ever look completely at peace. Hell of a ceremony. That citation doesn't do justice to what you did out there. Thank you, sir. You know Colonel Mitchell. Hammond gestured to one of the colonels, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses. He was my S3 in Fallujah, and Captain Morrison here. He clapped the Navy captain on the shoulder. He runs the SEAL training pipeline. We were just talking about the evolution of sniper doctrine. Maria nodded politely. She could feel where this was going. Officers loved to talk theory and tactics. They'd want her war stories, sanitized and heroic, suitable for their mental archives of combat wisdom. Hammond grabbed a whiskey from a passing server and took a long sip. You know, I've been following your career since you graduated Scout Sniper School. 4th woman to make it through, wasn't it? 3rd, sir. 3rd, even more impressive. They said you shot a 98 during final qual. That true? 97, sir. Wind call was off on 1 shot. Hammond laughed, a big, genuine sound that seemed to fill the room. Listen to this. Modest too, Morrison, you hearing this? Maybe we should steal her for SEAL sniper training. Marines don't let their best shooters go that easily, Bob. The Navy captain replied with a smile. The group had formed a semicircle around Maria now. She felt like a specimen under examination. More officers drifted over, drawn by Hammond's magnetic presence and the promise of interesting conversation. Within 2 minutes, 15 people surrounded her. Some she recognized from the ceremony. Others were strangers wearing enough ribbons to start a decoration business. So tell me, Staff Sergeant, Hammond said, his voice taking on a jovial tone that Maria immediately mistrusted. What's your count? The question hung in the air like cordite after a rifle shot. Several officers chuckled, nervous, anticipatory sounds. This was the question, the one that always came up eventually in warrior circles. Kill count, body count, the scoreboard of combat. Sir, Maria kept her face neutral, but her heart rate kicked up. Come on, don't be shy. How many tangos did you send to meet their maker? What's the official tally for our best sharpshooter? Hammond grinned and looked around at his audience. I had 17 confirmed in Gulf War. Mitchell here claims 22, but I think he's counting guys who died of natural causes. More laughter. Colonel Mitchell protested good-naturedly. Confirmed kills, Bob, every one of them. So what about you, Rays? Hammond pressed, clearly enjoying himself. His whiskey sloshed in his glass as he gestured expansively. 3 deployments, 12 years of trigger time, that heroic action in Sangin. You must have sent a whole company of bad guys to hell. 30, 40, more. The circle of officers leaned in slightly. Some smiled. Others looked genuinely curious. A few seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. This was how warriors talked, how they measured success, how they processed the violence they'd witnessed and committed. Numbers made it clean, objective, professional. Maria felt something crack inside her chest. She'd answered this question before, usually with vague deflections or polite non-answers. I don't keep track, sir. Or, I just did my job, sir. Responses designed to satisfy curiosity without engaging with the question's premise. But standing here, metal heavy on her chest, surrounded by men comparing body counts like golf scores, something inside her broke. Or maybe it finally healed. The room had gone quieter. Everyone was watching now. Even conversations at distant tables had paused. General Hammond stood there, whiskey in hand, big smile on his face, waiting for her answer like a coach waiting for a trophy athlete to recall their winning statistics. Maria looked directly into his eyes. The smile on his face would haunt her memory forever, not because it was cruel, but because it was so genuinely expectant. He had no idea what he was about to hear. She took a breath. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. With respect, sir, Maria said quietly, her voice steady as her crosshairs had always been. I don't count them. Hammond's smile flickered, uncertainty creeping in. Maria continued, and every word felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd lost somewhere in the Afghan dust. I count the ones I saved. Silence was absolute. Not the polite quiet of a respectful pause, but the complete absence of sound that occurs when an entire room collectively forgets to breathe. Ice clinked in someone's glass. The air conditioning hummed. Outside, a seagull cried. But inside the reception hall, 73 people stood frozen, waiting for Maria's next words. General Hammond's smile had vanished. His whiskey glass hung suspended halfway to his mouth, forgotten. The confidence that had radiated from him moments ago evaporated like morning fog under a harsh sun. His eyes, those sharp blue eyes that had commanded Marines in 3 wars, suddenly looked uncertain. Maria took a step back, creating distance. She'd spent 12 years being what the Marine Corps needed her to be: obedient, professional, lethal when required. But something about this moment, this question, this expectation that she'd boast about ending lives, it crystallized every feeling she'd buried in shallow graves across her memory. "I don't count them," she repeated, her voice quiet but carrying through the silent room with devastating clarity. "I never have." Colonel Mitchell's mouth opened slightly. The Navy captain stopped mid-reach for his drink. A female commander in the back, someone Maria didn't know, had tears already forming in her eyes, as if she understood what was coming before the words arrived. Maria's hands, which never trembled during combat, which had remained steady through sandstorms and firefights and 6-hour overwatch positions, shook now. But she kept talking. "I count the ones I saved." The words landed like mortar rounds. 43. Maria's voice grew stronger. 43 United States Marines who walked home to their families because I was on overwatch. 43 sons and daughters, husbands and wives, fathers and mothers who got to hug their loved ones again. That's the only number that matters to me, sir. General Hammond's face had gone pale. The whiskey glass in his hand lowered slowly, mechanically, until it hung at his side. He looked like a man who'd just taken shrapnel, not in his body, but in something deeper, something he'd built his entire identity around. A Navy lieutenant in the corner, barely 25 years old, whispered, "Oh my God," so quietly it was almost inaudible. But in the crushing silence, everyone heard it. Maria wasn't finished. The dam had broken, and 12 years of carefully controlled emotion poured through the cracks. "I remember all 43 faces, sir." Her voice cracked but didn't break. "I remember Corporal Mike Stevens from Buffalo. I pulled overwatch when his platoon hit an IED in Marja. I saw him through my scope, dragging his wounded buddy to cover. 3 Taliban fighters moved to flank them. I stopped them. Mike made it home. He has 2 daughters." Several officers shifted uncomfortably. One of the colonels stared at the floor, but no one interrupted. No one could. "I remember Lieutenant Sarah Chen from San Francisco. Her convoy got ambushed near Kandahar. I was positioned 600 meters away. I watched insurgents moving into position with RPGs. 4 of them. I engaged. All 4 threats neutralized. Sarah's convoy made it through. She got married last year. I saw the photos on Facebook." Maria's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady, that same steadiness that had made her one of the Corps' finest shooters. Control, precision, purpose. "I remember Private First Class Deshaun Williams from Atlanta. He was 19 years old, sir. 19. He got separated from his squad during a firefight in Helmand. I watched him through my scope for 2 hours while he hid in a bombed-out building, waiting for extraction. I counted 6 insurgents moving toward his position, 6 different firing solutions, 6 threats eliminated before they knew anyone was watching. Deshaun made it to the helicopter. He's studying engineering now at Georgia Tech." A tear rolled down the female commander's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. General Hammond's jaw worked soundlessly. He looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find words. Around him, his entourage, Those officers who moments ago had been laughing and comparing kill counts looked shaken. Some stared at Maria with newfound respect. Others looked ashamed. One young major had his hand over his mouth, eyes wide. The other number, Maria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried to every corner of the room. The other number you asked about, sir. I couldn't tell you if I wanted to, because I never looked at those men as numbers to count. They were problems to solve, threats to eliminate, calculations of wind, distance, and ballistics. They were the things standing between my Marines and home. She paused, and the pause felt like a physical weight. But they're not what I think about at night, sir. When I close my eyes, I don't see their faces. I see the faces of the 43. I see Mike Stevens hugging his daughters. I see Sarah Chen in her wedding dress. I see Deshaun Williams walking across a stage to get his diploma. Those are the ghosts that visit me, General. The good ones. The ones I fought to protect. Maria's voice grew firmer, almost challenging. So with all due respect, sir, and I mean that sincerely, I won't ever answer that question the way you expect. Because the day I start counting the dead instead of the living is the day I lose the only thing that makes what I did bearable. It's the day I become what I was fighting against. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't shock anymore. It was something deeper, reverence maybe, or recognition. As if everyone in the room simultaneously understood that they just witnessed something profound, a fundamental truth that had been hiding in plain sight their entire careers. General Hammond finally moved. He set his whiskey glass on the nearest table with a soft clink that sounded like a gavel. When he looked up at Maria, his eyes were red-rimmed. This man, this legendary warrior who'd fought in 3 wars, who'd commanded thousands of Marines, who'd built his reputation on strength and toughness, looked broken. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice rough and barely controlled. He stopped, started again, failed. Finally, he simply said, "Thank you." But it wasn't thanks for her service. It wasn't thanks for her answer. It was thanks for showing him something he'd been blind to for 30 years. Thanks for giving him a new lens through which to view every shot he'd ever taken, every order he'd ever given, every operation he'd ever commanded. Admiral Wade appeared from somewhere in the crowd. He'd been standing at the back, listening. He moved to Maria's side and placed a hand on her shoulder, not as a superior officer, but as one warrior acknowledging another. "That," the Admiral said, looking around at the assembled officers, "is what valor actually looks like." The room remained silent for another heartbeat. Then somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause, not the polite, obligatory applause from the ceremony, but something raw and real and deeply felt. Officers who'd seen combat understood. Those who hadn't understood even more. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about every one of them, every decision they'd made, every life they'd taken or saved. Maria stood in the center of it all, exhausted and exposed and finally unburdened. General Hammond still hadn't moved. He stood there, staring at her, tears now openly streaming down his weathered face. The legendary Marine general was learning what it meant to be a warrior all over again. El Paso, Texas, September 23, 2009. The church bells rang 7 times as the hearse arrived at St. Patrick's Cathedral. 15-year-old Maria Reyes sat in the front pew, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the American flag draped across her brother's coffin. The flag was perfectly arranged, crisp, geometric, respectful. Danny would have appreciated that. He'd always been particular about his uniform. The church was packed. Danny had been popular, star quarterback in high school, Eagle Scout, the kid everyone knew would do something important with his life. And he had. He'd become a Marine. He'd served his country with honor. And 3 weeks ago, in a dusty village outside Kabul, an enemy sniper had put a bullet through his chest while he was distributing school supplies to Afghan children. 22 years old, gone in an instant. Maria's mother sobbed quietly beside her, clutching a handkerchief that had belonged to Maria's father before cancer took him 2 years earlier. Her Aunt Rosa held her mother's other hand, whispering prayers in Spanish. Around them, Marines in dress blues sat at attention, their faces carved from stone, honoring their fallen brother. But Maria didn't cry. She couldn't. Crying felt like surrender, and something inside her refused to surrender to this. There had to be a reason. There had to be meaning. Danny couldn't just be gone, couldn't just be a name on a list, a flag in a coffin, a memory that would fade. The chaplain spoke about sacrifice, about duty, about how Danny had died protecting the innocent. The words washed over Maria like white noise. She heard them but didn't process them. Her mind was somewhere else, replaying the conversation with the casualty assistance officer who'd come to their door. He was providing security for a humanitarian mission, the officer had explained gently, professionally, the way he'd probably explained it to dozens of other families. An enemy combatant, a sniper, fired from an elevated position approximately 400 meters away. Lance Corporal Reyes was struck before our forces could identify the shooter's location. He died instantly. He didn't suffer. 400 meters, an elevated position, a shot Danny never saw coming. Maria had asked questions the officer clearly wasn't expecting from a teenage girl. What kind of rifle? What caliber? How did they eventually neutralize the threat? The officer had looked at her mother uncertain, but Maria's mother had nodded. Tell her. She needs to know. 7.62 millimeter, likely a Dragunov SVD. Our sniper team eliminated the threat approximately 90 minutes later, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. The enemy shooter had already displaced from his original position. By the time we found him, he'd been preparing to engage another target. Another target, another American who would have died, another family who would have received a flag and a knock on their door. That night, Maria had started researching. Now, sitting in the church, she barely heard the eulogies. Danny's platoon commander spoke about his courage. His best friend from high school told a funny story that made people laugh through their tears. Her uncle read from the Bible. But Maria's mind was thousands of miles away, in the mountains of Afghanistan, calculating angles and distances. The Marine Corps Honor Guard performed the flag ceremony with robotic precision. 7 Marines, synchronized perfectly, folding the flag into a tight triangle. The lead Marine, a gunnery sergeant with kind eyes and a chest full of ribbons, knelt before Maria's mother and presented the flag. On behalf of the President of the United States Marine Corps, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. Maria's mother took the flag and finally broke, her sobs echoing through the cathedral. Maria put her arm around her mother, holding her while she fell apart, but Maria's eyes stayed dry. Inside, something had crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. The burial at Fort Bliss National Cemetery was worse. Watching the coffin lowered into the ground made it real in a way the church service hadn't. This was permanent, final. Danny was never coming home, never going to bust through the front door with that huge smile, never going to tease her about boys or help her with calculus homework or teach her to drive stick shift like he'd promised. The honor guard fired their rifles, 3 volleys that cracked across the cemetery like thunder. A bugler played taps. The mournful notes drifted across rows of white headstones, each one marking another story, another family's grief, another promise left unfulfilled. Maria stood at attention, her back straight, her jaw set. The Marines around her saw a grieving teenager. They didn't see the decision forming like steel in her spine. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling of the room she used to share with Danny before he enlisted. His side was exactly as he'd left it, posters of the Dallas Cowboys, a shelf of football trophies, a framed photo of him in his dress blues after boot camp graduation. At 2, 00 a.m., she got up and turned on her computer. The house was silent except for her mother's occasional sobs from the master bedroom. Maria typed carefully into the search bar, Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. The first thing she learned was that it was one of the hardest military training programs in the world. 9 weeks of hell designed to break anyone who wasn't absolutely committed. The physical requirements alone were brutal. Most candidates failed. Only the best of the best made it through. The second thing she learned was that, in 2009, only 2 women had ever completed the course. Maria read everything she could find: training requirements, physical fitness standards, selection process. The course curriculum covered ballistics, range estimation, stalking, camouflage, fieldcraft, and advanced marksmanship. Students had to learn to read wind, calculate bullet drop, account for the Coriolis effect, and make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. She read about the psychological demands. Snipers had to be patient, disciplined, and capable of making life-or-death decisions without hesitation. They had to live with those decisions forever. As dawn broke over El Paso, Maria found a video interview with a Marine sniper. He was asked what made a good sniper. His answer stopped her cold. A good sniper doesn't think about taking lives. A good sniper thinks about saving lives. Every threat you eliminate is another American who gets to go home. You're not a killer. You're a guardian. A guardian. Maria closed her laptop and walked to Danny's side of the room. She picked up the framed photo of him in his dress blues, his smile bright and proud and full of the future he'd never have. She sat on his bed and finally let herself cry. But even through the tears, her mind was working, calculating, planning. Danny had died because an enemy sniper got to him first. He died because there wasn't a better shooter watching over him. He died because somewhere in the chain of events that day, America's guardian angels had been looking the wrong direction. Maria made a promise to her dead brother in the quiet dawn light. She would become what killed him, but better. She would learn every skill, master every technique, exceed every standard. She would become the guardian angel that Danny never had. She would make sure that other Marines, other brothers, other sons, made it home to their families. And she would never, ever let another family receive a folded flag if she could prevent it. Maria Reyes was 15 years old. She had 3 years until she could enlist, 3 years to prepare, 3 years to transform grief into something with purpose and power. She stood up, placed Danny's photo back on the shelf, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The girl looking back had red eyes and tear-stained cheeks, but behind the grief, something else burned, a fire that would never go out. "I promise," she whispered to the empty room, to her brother's ghost, to herself. "I promise I'll be there for them." She had no idea if she could keep that promise. The odds were against her. The training would be brutal. The military didn't make it easy for women, especially in combat roles. But Maria had learned something that morning that would carry her through every obstacle ahead. Purpose is stronger than pain. And her purpose had just been born, Quantico, Virginia, March 2013. The rain hammered down like bullets. Maria lay in 6 inches of cold mud, her ghillie suit soaked through, weighing an extra 30 pounds. She'd been in this exact position for 11 hours. 11 hours without moving, without making a sound, slowly stalking toward a target 200 meters away, while 3 Marine instructors actively hunted her with binoculars and trained eyes. "I see movement, Sector 3, one instructor shouted. Maria froze. Her heart hammered, but her breathing remained controlled. Slow, steady, invisible. The instructors scanned the terrain with high-powered optics, searching for any sign, a glint of metal, an unnatural shape, movement that didn't match the environment. After 5 agonizing minutes, the instructor shook his head. "False alarm, keep searching." Maria allowed herself one slow breath. Then she continued her stalk, moving 2 inches at a time. This was day 47 of Scout Sniper School. 19 candidates had started, 8 remained. Maria was the only woman. The doubt had started on day 1. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reynolds, the chief instructor, had looked at Maria like she was an administrative error. "You sure you're in the right place, candidate?" His voice carried across the formation. "Supply Depot is Building 12. Some of the male candidates had snickered. Maria stood at attention, eyes forward. "Yes, Gunny, I'm in the right place." "We'll see about that." The physical tests came first. Hikes with 80-pound packs, obstacle courses designed to break the weak, endless push-ups, pull-ups, and runs that left candidates vomiting in the bushes. 3 men dropped in the first week. Another 4 failed the psychological evaluations, too aggressive, too unstable, or too haunted by whatever they'd seen in previous deployments. Maria passed everything, not easily, not comfortably, but she passed. The academics were harder. Ballistics equations, range estimation using mil dots, calculating for wind, temperature, humidity, and altitude, understanding bullet trajectory, terminal ballistics, and the Magnus effect. It was like learning a new language where every word meant the difference between life and death. She studied while other candidates slept. She memorized ballistic charts until she could recite them in her sleep. She practiced math problems until her hands cramped. And slowly, grudgingly, the instructor's attitudes shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. But the real test came during live fire exercises. The rifle range stretched out before her, targets at 300, 500, 700, and 900 meters. Marine instructors watched through spotting scopes, ready to evaluate every shot. Wind flags rippled down the range. The morning sun created mirage effects that warped her view through the scope. "Candidate Rays, you're up. Target 700 meters. Wind left to right 8 knots with gusts. Temperature 68 degrees. You have 60 seconds. Maria settled into position behind her M40A5 sniper rifle. The weapon felt like an extension of her body now, familiar, trusted, precise. She pressed her cheek to the stock, her eye finding the scope's sweet spot. Through the glass, she could see the target, a silhouette representing a human torso. But Maria didn't see a target. She saw the Taliban sniper who killed Danny. She saw the threat that had to be eliminated so others could live. She saw purpose crystallized into a single point 700 meters away. Her breathing slowed, heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to wind, distance, and geometry. She calculated 700 meters, bullet drop approximately 126 inches, wind deflection roughly 36 inches at this distance, adjust elevation, adjust windage, wait for the gust to pass. The wind flag steadied for 3 seconds. She fired. Through the scope she watched the impact, dead center mass. "Hit," the instructor called, his voice neutral but impressed. Maria didn't celebrate. She immediately cycled the bolt, chambering another round and scanned for the next target. This wasn't about accuracy. It was about saving lives, and lives didn't wait for you to celebrate your accomplishments. By week 8, only 6 candidates remained. Maria had the highest marksmanship scores in the class, but scores weren't enough. The final test was the stalking exercise, crawling through hostile territory, getting close enough for a kill shot while enemy forces actively searched for you. That's where she met Corporal James Chen. Chen was 2 years older, second-generation Chinese-American from Seattle, and the best spotter in the class. The instructors paired them together for the final exercises. Chen was skeptical at first. "No offense," he'd said on their first day working together, "but I've never worked with a female sniper." "And I've never worked with someone who thinks that matters," Maria had replied calmly. "So we're both learning something new." Chen had laughed, a sharp bark of surprise. Fair enough. They deployed to Afghanistan 4 months later. Helmand Province, Afghanistan, August 2013. The desert heat was murderous. Through her scope, Maria watched a Marine patrol moving through a village 600 meters away. They were distributing supplies, water, medical equipment, school materials, just like Danny had been doing when he died. "Got movement," Chen said quietly beside her, his eye pressed to his spotting scope. "Compound rooftop northeast corner, 200 meters from the patrol." Maria swung her rifle. Through her scope, she saw him, a Taliban fighter positioning an AK-47, settling into a firing position overlooking the unsuspecting Marines below. "Confirmed," Maria whispered. "Target acquired." Her heart rate was calm, her breathing steady. This was the moment everything had been building toward. 4 years of preparation, 3 months of the hardest training the military could provide, thousands of hours of practice, all for this. The Taliban fighter adjusted his position, his rifle coming up to his shoulder. Maria did the math in 2 seconds. Range 600 meters, wind minimal, temperature 95 degrees, elevation, target is 40 feet above the patrol. She placed the crosshair's center mass. "Send it," Chen said softly. Maria squeezed the trigger. The rifle recoiled. Through the scope, she saw the fighter slump. The threat was eliminated. Below, the Marine patrol continued their work, completely unaware that death had been stalking them from above, and that a guardian angel had been stalking death. "Confirmed hit," Chen said. "Target down." But Maria wasn't celebrating. She was already scanning for the next threat. Her scope swept across windows, rooftops, alleys, looking for the next danger, the next problem to solve, the next Marine to keep alive. "Clear," she finally said. "Patrol is safe." Chen lowered his spotting scope and looked at her. Something had just happened that he didn't quite understand. Most snipers, himself included, felt something after a confirmed kill. Pride, maybe, relief, sometimes regret, always something. But Maria just looked, purposeful, focused, like she just completed a math problem and was ready for the next one. "You okay?" he asked carefully. Maria kept scanning through her scope. "I'm fine, why?" That was your first combat kill." "No," Maria said quietly, her eye never leaving the scope. "That was my first save. There's a difference." Chen stared at her, and in that moment he understood. He wasn't working with a killer. He was working with something rarer, a true guardian. Over the next 8 hours, Maria eliminated 4 more threats. Each time she followed the same pattern: identify, calculate, engage, confirm, then immediately scan for the next danger, never celebrating, never counting, just protecting. When they were finally extracted that evening, Chen asked her a question he'd been thinking about all day. "Do you remember them, the targets?" Maria was silent for a long moment. The helicopter roared around them. Then she pulled out a small notebook from her pocket. Inside were photographs, grainy, printed from a cheap printer. Each photo showed Marines from that day's patrol. "Corporal Jake Morrison," she said, pointing to one photo. 23 years old, from Texas. He has a baby girl he's never met. He would have been the first one that fighter shot." She pointed to another photo. "Lance Corporal David Kim, 20 years old. He wants to be a teacher. He was standing right in the open." She had 12 photographs, 12 Marines who'd survived that day because of her. "I remember them," Maria said quietly. "The ones I fought for, that's what matters." Chen looked at the photographs, then at Maria, and felt something shift in how he understood his own role. "You're not like other snipers," he said. "I know," Maria replied, closing the notebook. "I'm a guardian." It was the first time she'd said it out loud. It wouldn't be the last. Sangin, Afghanistan, November 15, 2013. The distress call came at 3:47 hours. Maria jolted awake in her bunk, adrenaline flooding her system before her mind fully processed the words crackling through the radio. Broken arrow, Convoy under heavy fire, multiple casualties, requesting immediate QRF and air support. Broken arrow, the code that meant Americans were about to be overrun. Maria was dressed and armed in 90 seconds. Chen grabbed his spotting scope and range finder. The quick reaction force, 20 Marines loaded into 3 Humvees. The briefing was brutal in its simplicity. A medical evacuation convoy had been ambushed in Sangin district. 5 wounded Marines needed immediate extraction. The Taliban had them pinned down in a kill zone. Air support was 20 minutes out. The convoy wouldn't last 5. "Raise Chen, we need overwatch," Lieutenant Martinez barked. "Find high ground and give our boys some breathing room." The convoy screamed through the pre-dawn darkness, headlights off, navigating by GPS and night vision. Sangin was Taliban heartland, narrow streets, compounds built like fortresses, and insurgents who knew every inch of terrain. This was their home. They chose when to fight and where. Today they'd chosen wrong. The sound of gunfire reached them 2 clicks out, the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the deeper boom of American M4s. Tracers lit the darkness like deadly fireworks. RPGs whooshed through the air, their contrails painting orange streaks against the night sky. There, Maria pointed to a 3-story building, half destroyed by previous fighting. The top floor was exposed to the elements but offered a commanding view of the ambush site. "That's our position." Lieutenant Martinez didn't hesitate. "Go, we'll provide suppression." Maria and Chen belayed from the moving Humvee, sprinting toward the building. Bullets kicked up dirt around them. Chen took the lead, clearing corners with his sidearm. The building smelled like cordite and death. Bodies, old ones, lay in corners. Walls were pocked with bullet holes. The stairs were partially collapsed. They climbed anyway. The top floor was a nightmare of broken concrete and twisted rebar, but the sight lines were perfect. Through the pre-dawn gloom, Maria could see the entire ambush site, a street intersection where the convoy had been stopped by a disabled Humvee. Marines were using the vehicles as cover, returning fire in multiple directions. The wounded lay in the center, a Navy corpsman working frantically to keep them alive. And surrounding them, in compounds and rooftops and windows, Taliban fighters moved like wolves circling prey. "Jesus Christ," Chen breathed, "there's at least 40 of them." Maria was already setting up. She swept broken glass aside with her boot, positioned sandbags for stability, and settled behind her rifle. The M40A5 felt like salvation in her hands. Through her scope, the darkness became manageable. Shapes became targets. Chaos became geometry. "Range to the convoy?" she asked, her voice utterly calm. Chen worked his laser rangefinder. 200 meters to the nearest Humvee. Targets scattered from 50 to 400 meters. "Wind 3 knots right to left, gusting to 7. Maria's scope swept across the battlefield. She counted targets, assessed threats, prioritized. This wasn't about revenge or glory. This was about math. 27 Americans were down there, 5 wounded, 22 still fighting, 1 corpsman holding the line between life and death. Her job was simple: tip the scales. A Taliban fighter appeared on a rooftop 300 meters out, lifting an RPG to his shoulder. He had a clear shot at the disabled Humvee where the wounded were sheltering. "Target rooftop, northwest compound," Maria said. 300 meters. "Confirmed," Chen replied. "Send it." The rifle spoke. The fighter dropped, his RPG clattering away unfired. "Hit," Chen said. "1 down." Maria was already moving, her scope sweeping. Another fighter appeared in a window, AK-47 blazing toward the Marines. 200 meters. She adjusted for the slight wind, led the target by 6 inches and fired. The figure disappeared. 2 down. The sun began to rise, turning the sky from black to deep blue to orange. With light came clarity and horror. Maria could see how badly outnumbered the Marines were. Insurgents were maneuvering for a final assault. Some carried RPGs. Others had PKM machine guns. They were coordinating, preparing to rush the position from 3 directions simultaneously. The medevac helicopter was still 12 minutes out. Chen, I need continuous updates. Don't stop talking. Copy, target window, 250 meters west side. Maria fired, the fighter fell. Target alley entrance, 180 meters. Fire drop scan. Target rooftop, 400 meters, he's got an RPG. The range was extreme. Wind was picking up with the sunrise. Maria calculated in milliseconds. Bullet drop at 400 meters was significant. Wind deflection would push the round 18 inches. The fighter was moving. She led him by 2 feet, elevated for drop squeezed. Through the scope she saw the fighter stumble and fall. The RPG clattered away. Confirmed, Chen said, his voice tight with stress. Holy shit, confirmed. The battle became a blur of calculation and execution. Target, range, wind, fire, target, range, wind, fire. Maria's world compressed into the 6-inch circle of her scope. Each threat eliminated meant another American had a chance. Each shot was a prayer answered. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her trigger finger went numb. Sweat stung her eyes. The sun climbed higher, turning the rooftop into an oven. Brass casings piled around her. The rifle barrel grew hot enough to burn. She didn't stop. Ammo check, Chen called. 4 magazines left. Maria, you've been shooting for 4 hours straight. Had it been 4 hours, time had lost meaning. Below, the Marines still fought. The wounded still bled. The corpsmen still worked miracles. And surrounding them, the Taliban still came. So Maria kept shooting. A fighter appeared with a machine gun, 350 meters, fire, down. 2 fighters tried to flank from the south, 280 meters, fire, both down. An RPG team set up in a compound, 320 meters, fire on the gunner. Chen called an adjustment, fire on the loader, both eliminated. The Taliban's assault began to falter. They couldn't see her, couldn't find her. They only knew that anyone who exposed themselves died. Their coordinated attack dissolved into confusion and retreat. At 9:47 hours, 6 hours and 3 minutes after Maria had taken position, the medevac helicopter appeared on the horizon. Birds inbound, someone shouted over the radio. The Marines laid down suppressing fire. The corpsmen loaded wounded onto stretchers. The helicopter descended in a storm of dust and noise, its door gunners adding their fire to the chaos. One by one, the wounded were loaded, then the corpsmen. Then the QRF began bounding back, covering each other's retreat. Through her scope, Maria watched faces, young faces, scared faces, alive faces. 27 of them. A Taliban fighter appeared, trying one last shot at the departing helicopter. Maria's crosshairs found him, 290 meters, fire. He dropped. The helicopter climbed, banked, and disappeared toward Camp Bastion. The street fell silent. Maria's hands were shaking now. The adrenaline that had sustained her for 6 hours was evaporating, leaving behind exhaustion so profound she could barely hold her rifle. "Chen," she whispered. He was already there, taking her rifle, checking her for wounds she might not have noticed. "You're okay. You did it. They're all safe." Maria slumped against the sandbags. Her fatigues were soaked with sweat. Her shoulder would be black and blue tomorrow from recoil. Her hands cramped. Her head pounded. But 27 Marines were flying to safety. 27 families would get phone calls, would hear their loved one's voice, would know they were coming home. 27 names for her journal. "How many?" she asked quietly. Chen knew what she meant. "I stopped counting your hits at 20. Maria, I've never seen anything like that. You were everywhere. They couldn't move without you seeing them." Maria closed her eyes. She didn't want to know how many she'd killed. She didn't need that number. She only needed one number, 27. Did everyone make it? She asked, her voice breaking. Chen checked his radio, listened to the after-action traffic. His face broke into a huge smile. All 27 souls accounted for. 5 wounded, but they're stable. Everyone's going home, Maria, everyone. Maria felt something crack in her chest, not breaking but opening. For 4 years, since Danny's funeral, she'd carried the weight of her promise. Today, she'd kept it, 27 times over. Tears mixed with the dust on her face. She was a guardian. And 27 families would never know her name, would never know that on a rooftop in Sangin, a 22-year-old woman with a rifle and a promise had stood between their loved ones and death. That was okay. She didn't need them to know. She just needed them to be able to hug their Marines one more time. The next morning, Maria received a message that made her stomach tighten. General Hammond requests your presence. 800 hours. His office. Come as you are. Come as you are. Military code for this isn't official punishment, but it's serious. Maria arrived at 7:55, dressed in utilities, wondering if she destroyed her career with her honesty. The general's aide, a young captain with a perfectly pressed uniform, looked at her with something between respect and pity. He's expecting you, Staff Sergeant. Go right in. The office was smaller than Maria expected for a 3-star general. The walls were covered with plaques, unit photos, and maps of every conflict since Desert Storm. Behind a massive oak desk sat General Hammond, but he looked different than he had the night before. The swagger was gone. He wore utilities instead of his dress uniform. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept. Close the door, Staff Sergeant. Sit. Maria obeyed, her Marine Corps discipline overriding her nerves. She sat at attention in the chair across from him, hands on her knees, eyes forward. Hammond studied her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, nothing like the booming confidence from the reception. I couldn't sleep last night, he said. First time in 30 years that's happened outside of combat. I kept thinking about what you said, about how you count. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. At Maria's surprised look, he gave a ghost of a smile. It's 800. I'm a general. I can bend some rules. He poured 2 fingers in each glass and slid one across to her. Maria didn't touch it. Hammond took a long drink from his, then set it down with a heavy thunk. I've been asking that question for 30 years. What's your count? I've asked it of snipers, pilots, artillery officers. Hell, I've asked it of myself. He stared at his glass. 17 confirmed kills in Desert Storm. I was proud of that number. I put it in my fitness reports. I used it in speeches to motivate troops. 17 bad guys who wouldn't hurt Americans anymore. He looked up at Maria, and she saw something she never expected to see in a general's eyes. Shame. I never once thought about the other number. The number of Americans who lived because of those 17. I never counted them. I never even considered counting them. Maria remained silent. This wasn't a conversation that needed her input yet. This was a man working through something fundamental. Hammond stood and walked to his wall of photos. He pointed to one, a group of young Marines in desert camo, smiling despite the heat and dust. This was my platoon in Fallujah. I was a captain then. We got ambushed in the Jalan district. I killed 3 insurgents that day, got a Bronze Star for it. He touched the frame gently. But I never thought about the 28 Marines in this photo who made it home because of those 3. I never learned their names, never followed up to see if they were okay. I just moved on to the next mission. He turned to face Maria. You said you have 43 names, 43 faces. You remember them? Yes, sir. Show me. Maria hesitated. The journal felt private, sacred, but something in the general's face, the genuine need to understand, made her reach into her cargo pocket. She pulled out a small, worn notebook, its cover stained with desert dust and sweat. She'd carried it through 3 deployments. Hammond took it carefully, like it was made of glass. He opened to the first page. There, taped to the paper, was a photograph of a young Marine, probably 20 years old, smiling in front of a Humvee. Below the photo, Maria had written in neat handwriting, "Corporal Michael Stevens, 1st Battalion, 6th Marines. March of February 2012. IED ambush. Protected during evacuation. Survived. 2 daughters, Emma 4 and Sophie 2. Wife, Jennifer. Home, Buffalo, NY." Hammond's hands trembled as he turned the page. Another photo, another name, another story. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Kandahar Province, June 2012. Convoy ambush, neutralized RPG team. Survived. Married October 2014 to David Martinez. Home, San Francisco, CA. Page after page. 43 lives, 43 stories, 43 reasons why her trigger finger had never hesitated. Hammond read them all. It took 20 minutes. When he finally looked up, tears were streaming down his weathered face. "How did you get all this information?" he asked, his voice rough. "Facebook, unit rosters, some I tracked down personally. A few reached out to me after they heard I'd been on Overwatch for their operations. They wanted to thank me, but sir," Maria's voice grew firm, "I needed to thank them. They gave me purpose. They're the reason everything I did mattered." Hammond set the journal down gently and walked back to the window, his back to Maria. His shoulders shook. This legendary Marine general, who'd commanded thousands of troops and earned decorations in 3 wars, wept. "I have a grandson," he said quietly. "Marine Lance Corporal. He's in Afghanistan right now, 2nd deployment." He turned to face Maria, no longer trying to hide his tears. "Someone like you might be watching over him right now. Some sniper I've probably asked that stupid question to, and I never thanked them for keeping him alive. I just wanted to know their scorecard." Maria stood, forgetting protocol, forgetting rank. "Sir, what's your grandson's name?" Tyler Hammond. He's with 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines." Maria pulled out her phone, opened a note, and typed the name. "If I hear anything about 2-1, I'll find out if he's okay. I still have friends over there. We take care of our own." Hammond's face crumpled. He sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "Staff Sergeant Reyes, I owe you an apology. Not just for last night, but for every time I've reduced what you do, what all our warriors do, to a body count. You didn't just answer my question. You taught me something I should have learned 30 years ago." He picked up her journal again, holding it with reverence. "Would you be willing to speak to our command staff? We have a leadership seminar next month, I think. I think we need to hear this. All of us." Maria felt her chest tighten. Public speaking terrified her more than combat. But this was important. This could change how the Corps thought about its warriors. "Yes, sir, if you think it would help." Hammond nodded slowly. "It would help more than you know." He handed back her journal. "These 43 people, they have no idea what you did for them, do they?" "Most don't, sir. A few found out later. But it doesn't matter if they know. What matters is that they're alive to not know." The general stood and extended his hand. Not a superior to subordinate gesture, but warrior to warrior, equal to equal. Maria shook it. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant, for your service, for your honesty, for teaching an old dog that he's been counting the wrong things his whole career." He paused. "And for reminding me what it actually means to be a Marine. Semper Fidelis isn't just about being faithful to the Corps. It's about being faithful to each other, to the lives we protect." As Maria left his office, she heard Hammond on the phone. "Tyler, it's Grandpa. I know you're busy, but I just needed to hear your voice. I wanted to tell you, I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful for everyone watching over you. Stay safe, son. Come home." Maria walked down the hallway, her journal back in her pocket, her heart full of something she couldn't quite name. The general wasn't the only one who needed that conversation. She'd needed it too. She'd needed to see that her words mattered, that her way of counting could change minds. Behind her in his office, General Hammond sat at his desk and began writing names, not of enemies killed, but of the Marines who'd served under him and survived. It would take him weeks to compile the list. But for the first time in 30 years, he was counting what mattered. The ripple had begun, San Diego, California, 2 years later. Maria adjusted the microphone clipped to her collar and looked out at the audience. 200 faces stared back, combat veterans from every branch, every era, every war. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia. Some wore service organization caps. Others wore the invisible weight of memories they couldn't share. All of them carried the same question in their eyes: how do I live with what I've done? The Veterans Transition Center was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread about Maria's approach to processing combat trauma. Her story had gone viral after General Hammond's keynote speech at the Marine Corps Leadership Conference. News outlets picked it up. Military psychology journals published studies on her counting method. The VA started incorporating her perspective into PTSD treatment programs. But Maria didn't care about fame. She cared about the faces in front of her, faces that reminded her of her own reflection 2 years ago, after she'd left active duty and tried to figure out how to be a person instead of a weapon. "My name is Maria Reyes," she began, her voice steady. "I was a Marine Corps Scout sniper for 12 years, and I'm here to tell you that the way we count matters more than we think." She clicked a remote. Behind her, a screen showed the words, "What's your count?" We've all been asked this question in one form or another. How many missions? How many deployments? How many confirmed? We answer because it's expected, because that's how warriors measure success, with numbers, with metrics, with proof of lethality. She paused, scanning the faces. Some nodded, others looked uncomfortable. But I'm here to suggest a different metric, one that saved my life when nothing else could. Click, the screen changed. Count what you saved, not what you took. An older veteran in the front row, Vietnam era, judging by his cap, raised his hand. "Ma'am, with respect, some of us don't have neat numbers. We were in artillery, infantry. We'll never know if we saved anyone." Maria smiled gently. "Sir, did you serve with a unit?" "Yes, ma'am, 1st Cavalry Division." "How many soldiers were in your unit?" He thought. "Platoon strength, 42 men." "How many came home?" His eyes filled. 31. "Then your count is 31. You were part of the team that brought them home. You pulled security while they slept. You covered their movements. You shared your rations when someone ran out. Every day you kept them alive counts." Maria's voice grew passionate. "We think heroism is about what we destroy, but real heroism is about what we preserve." The old veteran nodded slowly, tears spilling down weathered cheeks. A younger woman stood up, army by her bearing. "I was a drone operator. I took kills from 7,000 miles away. I never saw the people I protected. How do I count them?" Maria understood this question deeply. "How many missions did you fly?" 137. "How many ground troops were those missions supporting?" The woman pulled out her phone, scrolling through old reports. Average of 15 personnel per mission, sometimes more. "Then your count is at least 2,000, probably more. 2,000 American service members who completed their missions because you were watching from above. 2,000 people who came home because you did your job perfectly." The woman sat down slowly, her hand covering her mouth, processing this reframing of years of guilt. For 90 minutes, Maria answered questions, told stories, and helped veterans recount their service through a lens of preservation rather than destruction. She showed them her journal, now expanded to include not just her 43 from direct sniper operations, but every Marine from every unit she'd ever supported. The number had grown to over 300. "These are the faces that visit me now," she said, showing photos. "Not the ones I killed, but the ones I fought for. This is Sergeant Rodriguez. He has 3 kids now. This is Lieutenant Patterson. She's a high school teacher. This is Corporal Washington. He started a business helping veterans find jobs. She closed the journal and looked directly at the audience. Your ghosts don't have to be enemies. They can be the people you saved, the buddies who made it home because you were there, the civilians you protected, the children who grew up with parents because of your sacrifice. That's the count that matters. That's the number that lets you sleep at night. After the presentation, a line formed. Veterans waited to talk to Maria one-on-one. She stayed for 3 hours, listening to stories, helping them reframe their service, showing them how to build their own journals of preservation. Then near the end, a young man approached. Navy SEAL, maybe 27 years old. His hands shook as he held a photograph. "Ma'am, I don't know how to say this." His voice cracked. "Syria, 2014. My team got ambushed. We were pinned down for 8 hours. Someone we never knew who was providing overwatch. Sniper fire so precise it was like having God on our side. Every time ISIS moved to flank us, they went down. All 6 of us survived." Maria's breath caught. Syria, 2014. She'd done a brief rotation there between her 2nd and 3rd Afghanistan deployments. The young SEAL showed her the photograph. 6 men in tactical gear, dusty and exhausted but alive, standing in front of a helicopter. "I don't know if it was you," he continued, tears streaming. "The odds are crazy, but I've been trying to find whoever saved us for 9 years. I needed to say thank you, not just for my life but for teaching me that it's okay to remember my service this way. I have 23 guys I saved in my career. That's my count now. That's what I hold on to." Maria looked at the photograph. The location, the date, the tactical setup. Her memory flickered. A rooftop in Raqqa, 8 hours of continuous overwatch, 6 friendlies surrounded, multiple threats eliminated. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chen. These are my brothers, all alive, all home, all doing okay." Maria pulled out her journal and flipped to a page marked Syria, November 2014. There, in her handwriting, 6-man SEAL team surrounded Raqqa province. Provided overwatch 8 hours, 13 threats neutralized. All 6 extracted safely. She showed him the entry. Marcus Chen's legs gave out. He knelt on the floor, sobbing. Maria knelt with him, holding him while he released 9 years of grief and gratitude, and survivor's guilt and love for his brothers. "You all made it home," Maria whispered. "That's all that matters." "Because of you," he choked out. 6 families got to see us again because of you." "No," Maria said firmly, lifting his chin so he looked at her. 6 families got to see you because I did my job, because that's what we do. We protect each other. We bring each other home." She helped him stand. "Now you're doing the same thing, Chief. Every person you saved, every mission you completed, every brother you protected, that's you being someone else's guardian. The chain never breaks." That evening, Maria sat in her apartment overlooking Mission Bay. Her journal lay open on the table. She'd added Marcus Chen's name and photo to her list, not as someone she'd saved, but as someone who'd saved others because he survived. The ripples kept expanding. On her wall hung a photograph of Danny in his Marine Corps dress blues. She looked at it and smiled. "I kept my promise, Hermano," she said softly. 43 became hundreds, hundreds became thousands, and now thousands are learning to count the way you would have wanted. Her phone buzzed. A text from General Hammond. "Tyler made it home from deployment today. Thought you'd want to know. Thank you for checking on him, and thank you for changing how I see everything." Another text arrived, this one from a veteran she'd spoken to last month. "I made my first journal entry today. My count is 17. I can finally sleep." And another, "Showed my therapist your video. She wants to incorporate it into group therapy. You're saving lives here too, Maria." Maria looked out at the Pacific, watching the sun set in brilliant orange and purple. Somewhere out there, young warriors were making impossible choices, taking lives to save lives, carrying weights they couldn't name. But maybe now, some of them would learn to count differently. Maybe they'd count the faces of the saved instead of the ghosts of the fallen. Maybe they'd understand that being a warrior isn't about how many you kill. It's about how many you bring home. Maria closed her journal and stood. Tomorrow she'd speak at Camp Pendleton. Next week, Fort Bragg. The following month, a National Veterans Conference. The message was spreading, rippling outward like rings in water. But tonight, she was just Maria, a woman who'd kept her promise to her brother, saved 43 lives, and accidentally started a revolution in how warriors measure their worth. She raised her glass of water toward Danny's photograph. Semper Fi Hermano, always faithful to the mission, to each other, to bringing everyone home. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon. Inside, a guardian rested, knowing that her real count, the only one that mattered, grew larger every day. Not in the lives she'd taken, but in the lives she'd saved, and the lives those saved would go on to save. The legacy of a guardian never dies. It multiplies. The end.